It started like any other day in Pine Ridge Estates, a calm, sun-drenched Friday with just the right amount of breeze rustling through the trees. The lawns were perfectly trimmed, the sidewalks free of debris, and the scent of blooming gardenias drifted faintly through the air. Birds chirped from the high branches, occasionally swooping low as if to inspect the humans going about their routines. I had just returned home from work, slipping off my shoes the moment I stepped inside. The house was quiet, comfortably cool from the air conditioning, and the faint sound of classical music floated in from the kitchen where my wife, Emily, was preparing tea. This was our little sanctuary, a quiet cul-de-sac tucked within the safety of a gated community, where neighbors waved as they passed, and weekend barbecues were more frequent than crime reports. I glanced at the calendar and smiled. The weekend was finally here. 2 full days to unwind, take Max for long walks, catch up on reading, and maybe even get to that leaky faucet I'd been ignoring. I sat on the couch, sinking into its familiar comfort, completely unaware that the tranquility I cherished was about to be ripped apart. Because on this seemingly ordinary day, beneath the suburban calm, a storm was brewing. One that would change how I saw my neighborhood, my wife, and the very idea of security. Pine Ridge Estates had always prided itself on order. And for the most part, it worked. The Homeowners Association, the HOA, was meant to maintain harmony. Lawn height, fence color, mailbox design. Sure, it was a bit much, but it kept the place looking like the cover of a real estate brochure. But something had shifted in the last few months. At first, it was subtle. New warning signs at the front gate. Then came the bulletins about heightened community vigilance and expanded security measures. The HOA had apparently contracted a private security firm to increase neighborhood safety. No one really objected. After all, who doesn't want to feel safer? But almost immediately, things took a strange turn. These new guards began patrolling on foot and in unmarked vehicles. They wore dark uniforms, no official law enforcement insignia, but just intimidating enough to make residents hesitate. They weren't police, but they acted like they were. They stopped joggers, questioned teenagers, even checked delivery drivers' IDs. At first, I assumed they were just a bit overzealous. But when I saw one of them scolding Mrs. Hernandez, an elderly widow, for leaving her garbage bin out 10 minutes past collection time, I knew something was wrong. These guys weren't here to protect. They were here to control. The security guards, 3 in total, sometimes more, operated like they were on patrol in a war zone. They started demanding compliance, citing community codes that no one had ever heard of. One guard claimed he had the right to check into people's backyards for safety inspections. Another told a teenager on a skateboard that he'd be taken in for questioning if he didn't leave the tennis court area. And then came the tasers. Yes, actual tasers. Not pepper spray. Not radios. Tasers. They carried them on their belts like sidearms, and while they hadn't yet used them, they sure loved threatening to. I heard one guy tell a neighbor who left his sprinkler on too long that non-compliance has consequences. Non-compliance? With what? This wasn't a military compound. I started digging and found out the HOA hadn't even notified residents before hiring the firm. It had been done quietly, signed off by a small majority during a late-night board meeting. No transparency. No warnings. Emily had laughed it off initially. "Let them play dress-up," she said. "As long as they don't bother us." But we both knew it was only a matter of time. To everyone in the neighborhood, Emily was the epitome of suburban serenity. She greeted every passerby with a warm smile. She baked cookies for new neighbors. She watered her roses each evening while Max trotted happily alongside her. She was the kind of person who never raised her voice, never picked a fight, and always gave people the benefit of the doubt. But that was just the surface. What most people didn't know, and what Emily rarely spoke about, was her past. For over a decade, Emily had served in one of the U.S. military's elite special forces units. She'd been deployed across conflict zones, infiltrated high-risk areas, coordinated rescues, and saved lives in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She was trained in tactical combat, negotiation, evasion, and survival. But you wouldn't know it by looking at her. She wore that past quietly, like an invisible badge of honor. It wasn't who she seemed to be, it was who she was. Calm under pressure. Calculated. Deadly if necessary. I'd seen glimpses of that side before. The sharpness in her eyes when something wasn't right. The way she'd scan a room instinctively, unconsciously clocking exits and body language. But never had it been needed here, until now. Friday evening. 6:47 p.m. The sky was turning gold, streaked with the pinks and purples of sunset. Emily clipped Max's leash to his collar, laced up her running shoes, and tossed me a casual wave. "I'm taking him around the block," she said, already walking out the door. I barely looked up. "See you in 20. Famous last words. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was steady, almost too steady. "I need you to stay inside. Some HOA guys are trying to intimidate me. I'm handling it, but just stay alert." And then the line went dead. My blood ran cold. I jumped off the couch and ran to the window, heart pounding like a war drum. Down the street, I spotted them. 3 of the uniformed guards, standing around Emily like they were about to detain her. One had something raised in his hand, a taser. Max barked furiously, trying to lunge, but Emily kept him calmly at heel. She stood straight. Her shoulders were relaxed, but her eyes were locked in. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't flinching. She was waiting. I recognized that posture instantly. I'd seen photos from her time in the field. The quiet before the storm. The coiled stillness of a predator watching her enemy make their fatal move. Whatever was about to happen, Emily had already prepared for it. And the fools in front of her had no idea who they were dealing with. Emily was halfway through her walk with Max when the confrontation started. The sun had dipped lower, painting the pavement in long golden streaks. Max, his tail wagging lazily, sniffed around a rosebush near the community park when the first uniformed man appeared from behind the hedge. Then another. Then a third. They fanned out like a clumsy tactical formation, clearly rehearsed but poorly executed. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of them barked. His name tag read Brenton. Mid-30s. Clean-shaven, fake military posture. Trying too hard. Emily turned slowly, one hand still wrapped around Max's leash. "Yes. You can't walk that dog here." Emily blinked. "Sorry. He's the wrong breed. Aggressive dogs are not allowed on community sidewalks." Emily stared at him for a moment, letting the absurdity of the statement hang in the air. "He's a golden retriever," she replied, tone even. "The friendliest breed in America. He doesn't even bark at the mailman." Another guard stepped forward. This one had Tucker stitched on his uniform and the unmistakable puffed chest of a man who'd never won a real fight. "We've received complaints," he said, voice rising like a prosecutor in a courtroom drama. "And you're violating Rule 4C, Section 9 of the HOA Guidelines." "May I see the written notice?" Brenton and Tucker looked at each other, momentarily caught off guard. "We don't carry notices," Tucker said after a pause. "You can check your email. Or go home. Or," he stepped closer, "face further action." Emily's eyes flicked to his belt. Taser. This was no longer a conversation. It was a threat. Brenton raised his hand, and the metal glint of a taser caught the light. "This is your last warning, lady. Go home now." Emily didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her grip on Max's leash. "Sir, I'm asking you one more time. Produce a written violation notice or leave me alone." Tucker snorted. "You think you're tough or something?" Emily's calm never broke. What they couldn't see, was that her left hand had subtly tapped twice on the face of her smartwatch. It was a silent signal, one she hadn't used in years. That signal was now bouncing off satellites, pinging a half-dozen former operatives she had once called teammates. People who had served beside her, trusted her, bled with her, and some of them lived close, very close. Brenton took one more step forward, lifting the taser. "We won't ask again." Emily's voice dropped half an octave, quiet, sharp, and deadly calm. "I highly suggest you put that thing away before this gets out of hand." The 3 men hesitated, unsure whether to laugh or escalate. And that's when the world shifted. 10 minutes later, the tranquility of the suburban street was broken by the deep rumble of engines. From both ends of the block, Two matte black SUVs rolled in silently and simultaneously, like chess pieces sliding into position. They didn't screech or speed. They arrived, with purpose. Doors opened in unison. 6 people stepped out. No uniforms. No flashing lights. Just casual clothes and perfectly composed body language. But even from a distance, their posture was unmistakable. These were not weekend warriors or retired mall cops. These were trained professionals. One of them, a tall woman with a scar above her eyebrow and a jacket tied at the waist, made eye contact with Emily and gave the subtlest nod. Another, bearded and broad-shouldered, crossed the street and leaned casually against a stop sign, eyes locked on Brenton's hands. They didn't yell. They didn't posture. They just stood there, watching. Brenton instinctively took a step back. "Who the hell are these people?" Tucker whispered, suddenly aware that the air had thickened. Emily let the silence hang for a beat. Then she smiled, barely. "I told you. I called my team." What happened next didn't require violence. It didn't need shouting, or even a single raised fist. The presence alone, the aura of these people, was enough to shift the balance of power instantly. They moved like they knew the terrain, like they had already rehearsed every possible outcome in their heads. Emily's team had fanned out around her, creating a loose perimeter. One of them took a phone call, speaking low and clear into a headset. Another began recording the entire scene with a small body cam clipped to his backpack strap. "Sir," the tall woman with the scar said to Brenton, "I suggest you step away from the civilian and holster your weapon." Brenton hesitated. "Who are you to give orders?" The man by the stop sign stepped forward and flashed a badge, military intelligence. Real, current, active. Emily's voice remained quiet but firm. "You're in way over your head. That taser, that threat. That was a federal mistake. You impersonated law enforcement and threatened a veteran in public." Brenton looked around like he wanted to find someone to rescue him. There was no rescue coming. Just then, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. The security guards turned pale. "You called the cops," Tucker said. Emily shook her head. "You did. To report me." And with that, the final move was made. 2 patrol cars pulled into the neighborhood, red and blue lights flashing against the rows of trimmed hedges and brick facades. The police stepped out slowly, surveying the scene. One officer approached Emily while the other made a beeline for the guards. "We got a report of a disturbance," the first officer said. Emily spoke calmly. "Yes. These men attempted to detain me illegally, threatened me with a taser, and claimed my dog was violating HOA rules without providing any documentation." The officer glanced at Max, who sat obediently at her side, tongue lolling. He raised an eyebrow. "This is the dog in question?" "Yes." The officer turned to Brenton. "Is that correct?" Brenton stammered. She was walking an aggressive breed. She refused to follow instructions. "What breed is the dog?" "A golden retriever." A long pause. The officer's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his tone. "Are you aware it's illegal to impersonate law enforcement, sir? Carrying a taser without a license? Threatening civilians under color of authority?" Brenton opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Behind the officer, Emily's teammate, badge still in hand, stepped forward. "We have full video and audio of the interaction. The HOA guards escalated without cause. My name is Agent Reeves. I'm currently stationed at Fort Redmond, Military Intelligence Division. I can verify the victim's background and our presence here." At that moment, Tucker visibly deflated. His shoulders dropped, his bravado vanished, and he muttered something about "just doing our jobs." The police took everyone's statements. Thorough, professional, respectful. But it was clear who they believed. Emily was thanked. Her teammates were nodded at with quiet deference. The HOA guards were given formal warnings, and not just verbal ones. A police report was filed. Taser licenses were confiscated. An investigation was promised. And as the officers left, the neighborhood stood a little quieter than before. By the time the police cars disappeared around the corner, the spell of suburban normalcy had been shattered. Neighbors who had watched from behind curtains now emerged cautiously. Some came walking out with coffee mugs in hand, feigning casual curiosity. Others openly approached Emily, concern etched across their faces. One of them, a middle-aged woman named Janice from across the cul-de-sac, shook her head in disbelief. "I knew those guys were getting out of hand," she muttered. "But this, threatening you, that's insane." Emily just nodded. She wasn't interested in reliving the confrontation. She knelt and unhooked Max's leash, scratching behind his ears. "What were they even thinking?" Janice continued. "They looked like wannabe SWAT. I thought they were just here to check parking violations." Emily stood up slowly. Turns out they weren't even real security. Just hired muscle. That night, the truth came trickling out like a slow leak, except no one could shut it off. Whispers traveled faster than wildfire. The HOA enforcers, as people mockingly began calling them, had 0 certifications. They weren't trained law enforcement. They weren't even properly vetted. One had been fired from another gated community for aggressive behavior. Another was on probation for a bar fight. Most of the HOA board hadn't even known about the private security firm's real tactics. They had signed off on a security upgrade proposal that used words like visible deterrent presence and community compliance specialists. Nobody imagined it meant 3 guys with tasers bullying residents over dog breeds. Emails started flying. Phone calls lit up. And by Monday morning, a full-blown emergency HOA board meeting was underway. That Monday evening, the community clubhouse filled to standing room only. It was usually a ghost town, reserved for birthday parties, yoga classes, and the occasional bake sale. But tonight, it was buzzing with outrage. Rows of folding chairs were filled. Neighbors lined the walls. Phones were out. A few residents even had handheld microphones to capture everything. At the front sat the HOA board, 7 members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The president, a balding man named Rick Walters, kept glancing nervously at a printout in his hand. Emily sat quietly near the back with Max by her side. Her presence was enough to still the room. People looked over their shoulders toward her like she was a lighthouse in a storm. Rick finally cleared his throat. "We'd like to address the unfortunate incident that occurred last Friday evening." Unfortunate. That word hung in the air like a bad smell. "What happened," someone shouted, "was borderline criminal. You let thugs patrol our streets." A second voice chimed in, "They threatened Emily, our neighbor. They threatened her with a weapon." Rick tried to regain control, but the crowd wasn't having it. "We were told," Rick began again, "that the security firm was professional and licensed. We had no idea they were acting this way in the neighborhood. We're investigating the matter seriously and—" "You didn't know," yelled a woman in the front row. "You gave them tasers and uniforms and let them harass people." Then someone played a clip from their phone, a video taken during the confrontation. Brenton's voice rang out, unmistakable. "This is your last warning, lady." The crowd erupted. Gasps. Groans. More shouting. Rick held up his hands, visibly sweating now. Effective immediately, the board has voted to terminate the contract with the security firm. We're dissolving our relationship with them and issuing a community-wide apology. There was a pause, then quiet applause. But the mood hadn't shifted entirely. Not yet. The damage had been done. And people were looking for more than an apology. They wanted accountability. After the meeting, people came to Emily. Not in a wave, but in small, meaningful groups. An elderly couple who had once avoided her in passing now shook her hand and thanked her. A teenage boy who'd previously sped past her on his skateboard paused to say Max was awesome. Parents with young children nodded respectfully as she walked by, eyes filled with something like gratitude. The mythos had begun to build. She hadn't just stood her ground, she had exposed a weakness in their so-called secure community. And while she said very little in the aftermath, the story spoke for her. A few days later, a neighbor named Raj knocked on her door with a carefully wrapped package. "Just a small gift," he said. "From a few of us on the block." Inside was a handmade dog collar, stitched with the words, "Neighborhood Hero." It was navy blue with a golden trim and a tiny silver badge in the shape of a paw. Emily held it for a long time in silence before smiling softly. "I don't need a hero title," she said. "But Max does like wearing blue." Word traveled. Every evening she walked Max, someone new smiled or waved. She didn't brag. She didn't mention her military past. She didn't need to. The community had learned something they hadn't expected, that behind the quiet woman with the strong posture was someone who had once stared down real danger, and won. The HOA, for all its flaws, responded the way a guilty conscience does, quickly and publicly. They drafted new community bylaws limiting the scope of third-party contractors. They established a formal oversight committee. And most importantly, they hired a new legitimate security firm, one with trained personnel, body cams, and actual accountability. The new guards, friendly, courteous. They waved at residents, greeted children. They weren't there to police the neighborhood, they were there to protect it. Even the newsletter changed. The next month's issue featured a section called Community Spotlights, with a small, tastefully written paragraph. "We'd like to thank our neighbor, Emily W., for her composure, bravery, and integrity during a recent incident involving former contracted personnel. Her calm actions helped reveal systemic oversights and improve the safety of our neighborhood." No photo, no military history, just acknowledgement. And that's how she wanted it. Still, the shift in the community was undeniable. People walked with a little more confidence. There was more eye contact, fewer assumptions, more respect. Some neighbors even organized a weekend block party as a gesture of unity. Emily was invited, of course, but she stayed just long enough to smile, eat a slice of pie, and let Max wander through a crowd of admirers before heading home. Weeks passed, and the incident became part of neighborhood lore. Emily returned to her routine, early morning walks, quiet evenings on the porch, and weekend gardening. But every so often, someone new would stop by to ask about her dog, or compliment his collar, or simply thank her. For what, they weren't always sure. One morning, as she passed a group of neighbors chatting near the park bench, she heard a child whisper to his mom, "Is that the soldier lady?" The mother smiled. "That's her." Emily didn't break stride, but her lips curved into a quiet grin. Because here's the thing. Power doesn't always come from volume or visibility. It doesn't come from uniforms or shouting threats. Sometimes, it's found in composure, in calm action, in knowing when to speak and when to act. And as word continued to spread, it carried one simple truth. When you mess with one soldier, you mess with the whole team.